The Ford Thunderbird first took flight in 1955 as a two-seat convertible. It was Ford's response to the Chevrolet Corvette. The Thunderbird, however, was intended to be more luxury-oriented than the sporty Corvette, and most automotive historians now say it represents the birth of the personal luxury car segment. Oddly enough, Thunderbird could have been christened Vega at the behest of Henry Ford II, who began championing this small two-seater project in 1953. Of course, GM would eventually produce a car with the title of Vega a few decades later, but that's a different story. The ironic GM connection continues, with former GM executive Louis Crusoe actually serving as the chief of development of the original Ford Thunderbird. Sales were less than anticipated, so Thunderbird would evolve from a two-seater to a four-seater for 1958 at the direction of Ford executive Robert McNamara, who was concerned Thunderbird's luxury image was a key difference from the sporty two-seater Corvette. Trying to appeal to the widest audience possible, however, caused Thunderbird to languish and nearly disappear. Its mission seemed unclear, and its continued existence was called into question for the first time of many times. But Thunderbird would drastically evolve to survive. Space-age styling was all the rage by the early 60s, and Thunderbird undertook a major transformation for 1961. This transformation was one of many that would actually save the Thunderbird breed. Continued evolution during the mid-60s would further solidify Thunderbird's survival. From sequential rear turn signals to rocket-age styling, Thunderbird evolved to appeal to the swinging 60s aesthetic. Functional upgrades included advanced for the time front disc brakes and body styles and included both hardtop and convertible variations. For its fifth generation, Thunderbird moved upmarket to distance itself from the lesser expensive, recently introduced Mustang. Additional rear suicide doors were added for this generation only and attempted to echo the Lincoln aesthetic. Body-on-frame replaced the unibody construction of the previous offering, and the convertible model was dropped in anticipation of upcoming federal regulations. As the 70s progressed, Thunderbird would continue to struggle to justify its existence during an ever-increasingly difficult economic environment. By 1977, Thunderbird was tired, and it was nearly ready to throw in the towel. But Thunderbird would receive new life at the hand of Lee Iacocca, who was able to drastically reduce costs by transitioning Thunderbird to the smaller Torino platform. Despite a loss of 8 inches compared to the Lincoln-based platform, Thunderbird continued to look massive. This was actually seen as an advantage at the time, as consumers were wary of recently introduced downsized offerings from competitors. Sales would start to take off, and Thunderbird would once again regain the magic that it made it so popular all those years ago. As with so many offerings of the 70s, raw horsepower was replaced by plush, wall-to-wall luxury. Burl walnut trim and an enormous array of color and trim options distracted buyers from the reality of ever-decreasing horsepower performance. Luxury accoutrements would play a key role in Thunderbird rediscovering its groove. The ultra-luxurious Diamond Jubilee Edition represented Lincoln levels of opulence, while the Town Landau trim level echoed golden-era offerings of a bygone time. The more mainstream offerings of the 7th generation Thunderbird were nearly as luxurious, featuring two-tone paint and a range of color and trim levels that put today's offerings to shame. From hooker lipstick red to avocado green, the Thunderbird prospect of the late 70s had a world of options to explore. Of course, all good things seemingly must come to an end at some point, and the success of the 1977-79 generation of Thunderbird would prove no exception. Thunderbird would undergo a transformation for 1980 that many considered a giant step backwards. Major governmental and economic forces would dictate the legendary Thunderbird's transition to the drastically downsized Fox body platform. Ford would attempt to distract the faithful with highly luxurious interiors, featuring pillow-tufted seats and advanced-for-the-time electronics. But there was really no easy way of overlooking the question, was this really a Thunderbird? Even with all of the Lincoln-esque levels of advanced features and luxury appointments, enthusiasm for this generation Thunderbird was seriously dampened. The humble Fairmont was possibly pulled a bit too far from its original mission. And as was often the case with badge engineering, there was too little to differentiate Thunderbird from Fairmont. And of course, federal government regulations also played a part in the sudden massive downsizing of Thunderbird, which once again called the legend's very existence into question. The Square Bird, as it was christened by the journalist of the time, would continue on into 1981. Some critics actually did praise its somewhat successful ability, however, to appear as a Thunderbird in Fairmont drag. The 8th generation Bird would cling to its heritage as best it could, by continuing to offer trim levels of its storied past. From Heritage to Town Landau editions, the Squarebird did its best to convince wary prospects that the Thunderbird heritage truly was distilled into this new iteration that was actually downsized by over 17 inches in overall length. The 4.2-liter V8 Windsor, matched with the C5 3-speed transmission, was joined by a new entry-level 200 cubic inch 6, and a 302 V8 was also on offer, but no matter what power plant you chose, performance likely would prove entirely disappointing. Sadly, however, this was expected of this most malaise of eras. Fortunately, the bones of the Fairmont did offer rack and pinion steering, and a modern suspension system featuring modified McPherson struts. And of course, as was Ford tradition, the options list was seemingly endless. Thunderbird would continue into 1982 with few changes, but it is worth noting that this generation did feature some early innovations for Ford, such as the integrated flexible bumpers and enhanced interiors with improved ergonomics over other Fox body offerings. In fact, the Squarebird proved to be a testbed for more advanced Fox body platform models of the future. An example is Squarebird's Advanced Electronic Dash, which would serve the Fox body platform for several more years. But despite all these advances, by 1982, the Thunderbird was once again on the verge of extinction. Fortunately, as before, fate would intervene and ensure Thunderbird would evolve and survive. Indeed, something wonderful was about to take place. As is often the case with change, however, there is controversy. As with the visionary masterpiece of 20s cinema that is Metropolis, the effort to strive for greatness, to reach for the future, is sometimes met with great resistance. The desire to reach the next level of greatness is sometimes met with great folly. The best efforts to appease the public can sometimes lead to catastrophic consequences. The 9th generation Thunderbird was another attempt at the efforts pioneered by Chrysler in the 30s that was christened Airflow. The concept was to provide the most advanced automotive evolution since the Model T, aerodynamics. The design proved too radical and nearly bankrupt Chrysler. It would take decades for Chrysler to attempt such a daring leap in design again. Unfortunately for Chrysler, this second attempt also proved too radical. And of course, Ford would produce its own controversial attempt at evolution. What was supposed to represent the next evolution in automotive history nearly destroyed another automotive giant. GM's attempt at major evolution would also prove massively problematic in the form of the Corvair, even if perception ended up outweighing reality. Even industry veteran John DeLorean's attempt at advancing the automobile would ultimately fail to take flight. The 9th generation Thunderbird would prove successful, but even its Mercury cousin would continue the tradition of controversy, with a single line of a stylus pen that defined Cougar's unconventional C-pillar. As we age, we tend to see the lines of this bygone era of cars through the eyes of our youth. What looks so old to younger minds still manages to look new to those who grew up during this era. The rear of the first-generation Taurus wagon still seems of the future to me, yet causes myself to realize this was 35 years ago. Am I really this old? But before there was Taurus, there was the 1983 Thunderbird, a shape unlike anything before. I saw it as something from the future, but many of those I knew thought it was a weird jelly bean-shaped atrocity, a melted soap bar, a Ford product. How could you find this interesting, Topher? My response, this round new Thunderbird is based on the Fairmont. How is this possible? The Fairmont is so square and boring. How is this new Thunderbird from the same Fox body platform? I would explain to anyone that would listen, if you turned that Fairmont upside down and compared it to the 1983 Thunderbird, they would look exactly the same. But in the end, my friends just looked at me as if I had inhaled too much of that model car glue that was packaged in that little orange tube. But the reality was, this new Thunderbird truly was something special. The interiors, in fact, were also a generational leap in ergonomics, quality, and sophistication. And of course, the exterior represented the most radical aerodynamic shape in recent automotive history. In keeping with Thunderbird tradition, Thunderbird's model range was diverse as ever. The Thunderbird Turbo Coupe provided legendary performance, while the Elan Edition offered advanced electronics that rivaled offerings from Lincoln. And the rare and highly sought-after Fila Edition featured leather seating surfaces that mimicked the popular Fila shoes of the era. Marketing for the new Aerobird declared that before we made it beautiful, we made it right. And it is true that despite the highly conservative lines of the Fairmont, the fundamental Fox body platform had a surprising amount of sophistication baked into it. Most of the advanced features flew under the radar of Henry Ford II, who really only obsessed over right-angled sheet metal that supposedly would distract from dramatic downsizing. With Henry Ford II finally out of the picture, a sharper focus on innovation, performance, and quality would be introduced by new management with forward-thinking ideas. Rounded aerodynamic shapes would finally emerge, and Aerobird would benefit from the best of the Fox body breed, the Mustang. Years before Taurus, Jack Telnick's unbridled talent would breathe new life into the venerable Thunderbird. GM and Chrysler and many others initially thought Ford had gone too far with this jellybean curiosity. The 142 horsepower turbo coupe represented a radical departure from traditional V8 brawn, and the bolsters of the high-quality front seats were actually necessary, as this bird could do more than just run in a straight line. But looking beyond the revolutionary exterior, one found a level of fit and finish that could almost be described as craftsmanship. This was not a word usually associated with American offerings of the 70s and 80s. The 9th generation Thunderbird was one of the earliest attempts by Ford leadership to introduce the return of perceived quality in its products. The modified McPherson front suspension provided a level of handling that the press widely praised at the time. Economy was improved by Ford's EEC4 computer system that automatically adjusted ignition timing and air-fuel mixtures, as well as other powertrain optimizations. Fuel economy was also enhanced by Thunderbird's 0.35 coefficient of drag, a fact the marketing department made a big deal of to help overcome objections to the radical new shape. In addition to the Turbo 4, the 3.8-liter SX V6 and 302 V8 were also on offer. Instrument panels and interior detailing would continue to be further refined, so much so that many journalists of the time declared Ford's talk about improved quality to be more than just talk. A great deal of investment had been made to improve interior comfort and finish. The 9th generation Thunderbird would undergo further enhancements for 1987, particularly for the turbo coupe, which gained an intercooler and now produced 190 horsepower. It is ironic that the Taurus would clearly influence Thunderbird's 87 facelift, as it was this Fox body generation of Thunderbird that helped pave the way for the legendary Taurus. It was clear this final form of 83 to 88 Thunderbird had truly brought that old magic back. Other Thunderbirds would of course take flight, but there is no denying there was something truly special about this most special of Fox body heroes. For now, Thunderbird is but a memory. But who knows, maybe after a bit of a rest. This legend that brought so much joy for generations of fans will once again take flight.
At the top, go all electric, but your models drop. Shift into second, and soon will the experience all triviality.